Hey everybody, this is Byron the Dragon King, and we're back with a brand new video. Today I decided it's going to be another story, and this time it's going to be about my first car accident. So as you can tell, it's going to be super fun. So to properly tell the story about this car accident, let's start at the beginning when I bought the car. So originally I went to my mom's house because my stepdad was going to fix up this old Toyota for me. It was manual, and he was going to teach me how to drive stick. And I was really excited because I got really into Initial D, and I was like, man, I can't wait to learn how to drive stick. It looks so cool. I can't wait. I know it's kind of funny and cringe in a little bit, but like, I don't know, man. Initial D is what made me want to learn how to drive just because it looked so cool. So I got to my mom's house and I was like, oh, let's see the car. And she's like, yeah, your stepdad's going to fix it up. And then it'll be all ready to go and he can start teaching you stick. And I'm like, cool. And after like 2 hours, he's just like, yeah, I'm not fixing this. No, go on Facebook Marketplace and find your own car. And I was just like, what do you mean? I don't know what to look for a car. And he's like, just figure it out. And I'm like, what does this mean? He's like, fine, I'll do it. He's like, what kind of car do you want? And I was like, just a car? I don't know, man. He's like, okay, what like make and model? I was like, I don't care, man. I just want a car. So eventually he, like, after a while of that, he's just like, oh, Bailey, I found you the best car you're ever going to have. This car's going to be so great. I used to have one of these. It's an Oldsmobile Intrigue. You're going to love this. I used to have an Oldsmobile. It's the best car I've ever had. It's going to be great. I'm like, okay. And I look at it, I was like, that car's like as old as me. And he's like, oh yeah, don't worry about that. This car's going to be great. I'm like, oh no. So the next day we go to Madison, we look at the car and we go to test drive it, and the battery is dead and like the car dies, and my stepdad's like, what are you doing? Drive. It was like, it won't start. He's like, what do you mean? Let me see. So he made me get out and he tried to do it. He's like, it won't start. I'm like, yeah, that's what I fucking said. So he's like, oh, the battery must be dead. And the guy's like, oh, it might be an old battery. He's like, okay, let's go buy a new battery. So we go to O'Reilly or some shit, and he buys a new battery, put the new battery in. He's like, okay, how about now? So we drive it around. I'm like, yeah, it's a car. He's like, okay, pay the guy. So I pay the guy, and like, this car was super sus, man. There's a piece of wood, like, and like wood screws under the hood, like holding shit together, man. But I didn't find that out till later. So we drive to my girlfriend's house at the time, and he's like, oh, I was like, I'm supposed to spend the night here again tonight. He's like, oh, we should take it to your dad's house. And I was like, I'll do that tomorrow. He's like, oh, don't be joyriding. I'm like, oh, whatever. So then my friend messages me and she's like, hey, can you give me a ride to work? I'm like, sure. And I'm like, oh, perfect chance to drive my new car. I'm so excited. It's a brand new car for me, and it's going to be so much fun. And like just before I went to go pick up my friend to take her to work, me and my girlfriend at the time, we drove around. This car had like a 6 or 8 CD. No, it had an 8 CD changer in the back. I was like, this is so cool. It didn't have air conditioning because it wasn't working or something. So like that sucks. So we had to keep the windows rolled down. And like for whatever reason, when I first got it, like 2 of the windows didn't work, like the back left and the front right. And like, so it was like warm. It was like summertime. And so I drop my girlfriend back off at her house, and I go to pick up my friend, and I drive her to work. I don't really go the most efficient way, but I went the way I knew how. And I dropped her off, and then I went inside because it was the Applebee's I used to work at. And I was like, hey, I talked to the manager. I was like, hey, like, do I still work here? He's like, no. And I was like, but I have a car. He's like, okay. So then I like get back in my car and I start driving back to my girlfriend's house, and I realize, the music's not playing. That's really weird. And I'm driving. And the next thing I know, no matter how hard I push down on the gas, the car won't speed up. And I'm like, I should probably pull over. So I do. And then the car won't start back up. And I'm like, fuck me. So I had to like sit outside my car with the hood up and like put my thumb up as if I was hitchhiking, so someone would come, like, and eventually, like, a truck pulled over, and he, like, jumped my car, and I was like, thanks, man, and then he, like, left, and then I drove, I like, not even went, like, half a mile up the road before it died again, and then I, like, pulled to the side of the road again, and then, like, another guy tried to help me and jump my car, but it just wouldn't, like, it would, like, start, and then, like, I would start going up the hill, and then it would just die again. So I, like, pulled it over to the side of the road, and I had a cop come, and the cop's like, yep, it's fine. My girlfriend came and picked me up, and then, like, I was like, okay, tomorrow we're gonna figure this out. We're gonna get this solved. So then my girlfriend gets a call at, like, 1 in the morning from, like, an officer or something, and he's like, oh, we're gonna tow the car, and she's like, what do you mean? Like, we were told it's fine. He's like, oh no, it's blocking the road. So my girlfriend did wake me up, so my car gets towed, and then, like, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, let's go get my car, and she's like, you're gonna have to call around and figure out where it is. I was like, what do you mean? She's like, it got towed. So I had to call, like, multiple different, like, police departments to figure out which department it was that got my car towed. So then I went to the place that towed my car, and I'm like, hi, my car is here, can I get my stuff out? And they're like, yeah. So I go and get my stuff, and then I'm like, so how am I gonna get my car back? They're like, yeah, that'll be, I want to say it was something ridiculous. It was like a few $100s. It was like, I want to say it was like $200 to $400. It was it might have been like $400, which is just kind of insane, because all they did, like, they only had it for that night. But, like, then again, like, tow places are just, like, scams, man. Yeah, and so I tell my stepdad, and he's like, I told you you shouldn't have been joyriding. You're gonna have to figure it out yourself. And I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. So then I, like, talked to my former manager, the one who would later become my first roommate, and he's like, yeah, I'll lend you the money, and, like, we'll get your car out. So we pay for it, we take the battery out, leave the car there, and then he goes and buys a battery charger, and then I think this was also the time he bought his new TV in his entertainment center, and then, like, we're watching TV and, like, building this entertainment center, waiting for the battery to charge, and then it charges up, so then we go get the car and put the new battery in, and then we take it to my girlfriend at the time's house and leave it there. So, and then, like, a week later, her, like, landlord, she lived at a, like, area that was just a bunch of condos. They're like, you can't leave that car parked there. So then I moved it to my great grandmother's house, and then it sat there for a while. And then, like, a few months later, me and my former manager, who'd later become my roommate, we tried to fix it because the alternator was shot. So, like, my car battery wasn't getting charged, and that's why it kept dying. So we put, like, we're sitting here trying to figure it out, and like, it was the worst. So we looked up a YouTube video, and we found this one guy. His name was, like, Leroy or something, and he's, like, sitting there explaining it, and we're like, okay, yeah, and, like, I was like, I kind of get it. I've played My Summer Car before. This makes sense. But, like, the issue with Leroy's video is, like, he would be, like, giving you step-by-step thing, and then 3 minutes later, he's like, oh, yeah, by the way, you guys you're supposed to take this piece out, and just pulls it up, and he's like, wherever that was, so, yeah, you need to take that out. And it would be like, what the fuck does that mean, Leroy? So eventually we got the alternator out, and we put the new alternator in, and we're like, yeah, this is fixed. It wasn't fixed. So then after that, that car kind of just sat there for a few months until finally I started working at my call center job, and my stepdad's like, okay, give me the keys to the car. I'm going to have it towed. My friend's going to tow it for me, and I'll fix it down at the house. And I'm like, cool. So then he does that, and my mom's like, hey, your stepdad fixed the car. I was like, cool, when can I get my car back? She's like, when you get your driver's license. And I'm like, oh, boy. So then I had the long, annoying, like, issue of getting my driver's license. It took me 3 times. First time, no one had ever told me what a wide turn was, so that's why I failed. The second time, the light turned red as I was turning, so that was a fail. And then I passed the third time with like 14 points or something like that. So I passed the test, and I had my girlfriend at the time drive me down to my mom's house the same day I passed, and I was like, here, look, I passed. And she's like, okay, you can take your car. So I get the car back, and I'm like, hey, why doesn't the CD changer work? And my stepdad's like, oh, that's never worked. And I was like, yeah, it did. I had CDs in there, and it worked. And he's like, no, it never worked. And I was like, okay. But, like, all the windows rolled down finally, so I was like, cool. So then I drove the car back to my apartment, and I was like, this is sweet. And, like, I would be working my job, and then during my lunches, I would drive and go get food and stuff. It was great. And then 2 or 3 days after I got my car, I had a long day at work. It was like 11 o'clock at night. I was like, I just need to get out of the house. I need to get away from my roommate. It smells like shit in here because all he does is smoke pot. So I get in my car and I drive, and I'm driving, and ever since I had the car, I always told my stepdad that there was this weird shaking noise in the back right side of the car, like, you know, passenger rear wheel. And he's like, oh, that's fine, that's nothing, you're just imagining things. So I'm driving, and I go around this curve over by a VFW, and the next thing I know is I lose control, and I'm swerving right, so I overcorrect left, and the next thing I know is I hear, like, screeching noises as if it was, like, the Fast and the Furious or, like, some shit, and then just a bunch of movement. So, like I said in a previous video, my glasses were lost in that, because my windows were down because I didn't have air conditioning, and it was June, so it was hot. So, and like, it felt good to have the windows down, especially at night. So my glasses got like thrown out of the car. It was all a blur, and the next thing I know is I'm hanging upside down as Dirty Harry by Gorillaz is playing. Like, I want to say it was the last part where it's like the rap, you know, the price of water is only getting cheaper, or whatever the fuck it goes like. And I'm just sitting there upside down like, fuck, dude. And like, my car is still running, so I like unbuckle myself, fall into the ceiling of the car. Luckily, since all my windows were closed or were open, none of them broke, and like, there's no glass or anything. So like, I crawl out of the car, and I'm sitting there like, oh man, I can't see. And then I realized, oh, that's because my glasses are gone. And then I think about it, I was like, maybe it's not a good idea for my car to continue running while it's upside down. So I crawl back inside, I turn off my car, and then I find my phone on the ceiling of the car. And I'm like, oh, hey, good thing this didn't get lost. So I crawl back out of the car, and by then, like, the police had showed up, and they're like, oh, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And I, like, stand up to, like, take a picture of my car. They're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I need to tell my boss I can't work tomorrow. Like, fuck, chill out. Yeah, so that's when I take a picture of my car, and I send it to my boss, and I'm like, hey, Cam, I can't work tomorrow. I'm sorry, buddy. He's like, holy shit, dude, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. And then, like, I messaged my ex-girlfriend at the time, who's my girlfriend previously in the story, and I'm like, hey, can you come pick me up? I crashed my car. She's like, oh, shut up. No, you didn't. And I sent her the picture. She's like, what the fuck? Are you okay? I'm like, yeah. So then an ambulance shows up, and they, like, make me sit in the ambulance, and, like, they're doing my pulse and stuff, and they want to do my blood sugar, but I'm like, no, dude, no, I don't want you to prick my finger. I hate that shit. I don't like needles. I don't like getting my blood drawn. No, I don't want to. And they're like being weird about it. I was like, fuck, dude. And like, they're like, were you drinking? I'm like, no. Were you high? No. What were you doing? Driving? Why were you driving? 'Cause I wanted to get out of the house and get away from my roommate. Like, fuck. And then like, They're like, were you running from someone? I was like, no, what? And they're like, we need to take you to the hospital. I was like, dude, I'm fine. I don't need to go. And they kept on like trying to get me like to go in the ambulance and shit. I'm like, dude, I'm fine. Like, fuck. I don't need to go in the ambulance. And then finally they're like, we have a girlfriend here. And I'm like, oh, no. So then like we go out and we talk to it's like the cop, my ex, myself, and then like an EMT guy. And we're like talking. And they're like, she's like, oh, Bailey, you need to go to the hospital. I'm like, dude, I'm fine. I just want to take a shower, dude. And she's like, you need to go. And I was like, nah. And like, this is when the cop said the infamous, look, son, I know you think you're super strong, but your car's made out of steel and your car's messed up. So I think you need to go in. And it's like, dude, I'm like, fine. And then I like crack my back because it's just something I do. Like I stretch and crack my back, and like the cops are like, whoa, what are you doing? Oh, don't do that. I'm like, bro, I'm fine. And my ex is like, yeah, he does that. Just let him be. And I'm like, dude, just let me be. And they're like, oh well, okay, we'll let you go as long as you promise you'll go with her to the hospital. I'm like, fine, whatever. So then my ex is like, you're going to the hospital. I was like, dude, just let me shower first. She's like, no, you might die. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. So long story short is next thing I know, I'm in the hospital. They're like, why are you here? I was like, I was in a car accident. And they're like, oh, right this way. Then they make me get in a neck brace. They make me like lay in a bed. They put all this stuff on me. They do an IV. They do all this bullshit and all these tests and whatnot, x-rays. And after like 4 or 5 hours of this shit, they're just like, huh, you're perfectly fine. I'm like, yeah, I know, right? They're like, well, we need to wait for you to pee before you can leave to make sure everything's okay. And I'm like, I can't pee laying down, dude, especially when I'm in a bed. Like, I feel like I'm going to piss the bed. I can't do this. So after like half an hour of arguing with them, they're like, fine, but you have to like stand up in the room and do it. I'm like, sure, whatever, dude. And then like, I like the jug's like half a gallon or like a gallon or something. It's like this big, huge jug, and I fill it up like halfway, and I'm like, oh man. And like, they're like, wow. And like before that, sorry, I'm just bad at telling this story. I'm like sitting there in the bed, like with the neck brace on and everything, and I'm like, dude, there's dirt in my ears, behind my ears. I was like, can you guys like help me? There's like dirt in my eyes. It hurts to blink. And like they eventually got like a wet towel or something, and they wiped dirt out of my eyes, and it was just like caked in there. Like they would do it, and there was just like black spots on the towel. So after the whole pee thing, they finally are like, okay, you can go home. And then the next day I get new glasses, and then I go and find where my car is being held, and it's at the same place. And I talked to them. I was like, okay, what's going on here? They're like, well, for the $400 or whatever, you can take the car home with you. And I'm like, dude, I don't want to fucking take this home with me. And they're like, okay, well, you need to, well, then for this much money, we'll take it off your hands. I was like, okay, whatever, I'll do that. They're like, do you have the title? I was like, no, I just put in the paperwork to get license plates. And they like did this fucking scummy shit. And like, it took me like a week, and I went back in. I was like, I still don't have the title. You guys need to stop charging me for this. And they're like, oh, we'll just do it like this. And long story short, I never paid them back. And like when collections called, they're like, yeah, they say you owe them $9,000. And I'm like, no, that's not true. And they're like, okay. And they never called back. So... And that's the story about my first car accident. It was a crazy point in my life, and I hope you guys enjoyed that story. If you liked it, please leave a like down below. If you disliked it, leave a dislike. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.